It's no secret Russia has and continues to use its media to control public opinion, increasingly so during the recent conflict with Ukraine. Joining us now for more on the Russian media machine in London, England via Skype, Peter Pomerantsev. He is author of Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, the Surreal Heart of the New Russia. Peter, it's good to have you on TVO tonight. Why don't we start by your tell us to what extent you think media manipulation has become normalized in Russia?
Well, listen, this is a very old tradition. In Soviet times, there was a very deep idea, a Marxist-Leninist idea, that through propaganda you could remake the world, remake society, control all of society. So the propagandist was always a demigod in Soviet Russia. And really that's continued into the Putin era, except now there's no one ideology. They're not trying to create the ideal communist or create the ideal communist society. They use media to sort of entrench Putin's power and now increasingly to wage wars. But information has always had not the role of journalism, not the role of speaking truth to power, but as an extension and one of the most powerful extensions of the Kremlin's sort of armory.
As everybody will know from the accent, you're not originally Russian, you're originally from England. And I guess I want to find out what made you almost a decade ago decide to give up working in a presumably somewhat more normal media culture in England for Russia.
Well, listen, I mean, when I first went to Russia after university, and it was a very, very exciting place to be. London felt rather sort of predictable. And Moscow was booming in those days. They would say it was the height of the oil boom. It felt like Jazz Age New York. Or I don't know, 1930s Berlin. It was some sort of wild, exciting place that a young man after university wants to be part of. And also television was booming. I'm a TV producer. And it was an opportunity for someone like me, just out of film school, to start working on really big projects instead of being sort of, a third-rate assistant as I would have been in London. So it was, land of opportunity. Anything could happen. Incredibly exciting. And then during my decade in Russia, it got sort of more and more disturbing.
So if 90% of Russians are getting their news from television, as surveys tell us, and what they're seeing on television is of concern, give us a sense of what kind of a steady diet of whatever it is that they're getting.
Well, listen, I mean, it works. It started to work now, especially in the conflict over Ukraine, a little bit like a cult. In the same sense, there's non-stop conspiracy theories. And the conspiracy theories are crazy. There's right through even Putin's a member of the CIA. The CIA are everywhere. The Masons are everywhere. And it's not just political conspiracies. There's medical conspiracies and environmental conspiracies. And so non-stop conspiracies on Russian TV that kind of break down critical thinking. A bit like a cult. When you enter a cult, you're sort of like the cult leader will sort of like overload you with information so you can't think properly. And then there's non-stop work with trauma, exploiting historical trauma. So, Russia was a miserable place in the 1990s. The Americans had us down. Remember the 1990s, it was awful. Remember the Second World War, millions of people died. So again, like a cult would have its victims remember traumatic bits in their lives. Russia repeats these traumas, but doesn't cure them, doesn't sort of start talking about them critically or rationally. It just sort of itches at all the pain in Russian history, and there's a lot. And then at that moment, with sort of the audience already kind of already kind of like turned to emotional mush, arrives Putin saying, I will restore Russia's greatness, I will make you feel great again, just like a cult leader does. So it's become more and more like that. In many ways, that's a very recent thing that's happened during the crisis in Ukraine. Before that, the games that were played between the Kremlin and its audience were much more subtle and much more playful. But now it's very, very kind of direct, messing with people's emotions and minds.
How valuable do you think the current Russian president feels television to be as it goes towards fulfilling his aims, politically speaking?
Well, listen. The first thing that Vladimir Putin did in 2000 when he becomes president, and this is before he takes control of the energy sector, before he takes control of the secret services, the bureaucracy, the first thing he does is take control of television. He gets rid of the oligarchs who played kingmaker and helped create him, and he takes it over. It is absolutely key to him. He knows that when he was first nominated as prime minister, he had an approval rating of nothing, like 3% or something in 1999. He was purely created by the power of television. He's not a Chavez-like figure who's got he's not a true populist who can go to the people and get their backing and, walk through the slums with the crowds cheering behind him. He was a no-one created through, a made-for-TV war in 1999, the war with Chechnya, and a huge television PR campaign and a televised politics. So for him, it's absolutely key. If sort of Stalin's power was 80% violence and 20% information, Putin's is 80% information, 20% violence.
Do you have evidence that he actually calls up the heads of television stations or news directors and says, say this now?
Well, it's not Putin who does that. So, I mean, it's not evidence. This is an open fact. So every week there's a meeting of the main channel heads with somebody from the presidential administration. It used to be Vladislav Surkov. He used to run the TV show. Now it's usually Gromov. This isn't a secret. I mean, people talk about this openly. So they meet once a week and they're given the agenda, what's the story, who they can have on TV, who they can't. There's a red telephone. There's a lot of telephone calls hither and thither. But once they know the agenda and they know the framing and they know the main story they need to push, TV heads in Russia are very, very creative and they kind of improvise around that theme. But this isn't a secret. I mean, this is done fairly openly, like it would have been in the Soviet Union. The idea that TV should be something independent is really fairly bizarre in Russia. There was an experiment with it in the 1990s, but even then they kind of belonged to oligarchs who tell journalists what to do. So the idea of a sort of a press as a fourth estate, it never really took hold in Russia.
So it is naive of us to hope that that will ever change?
Well, with this regime in power, certainly not. I mean, this is how they see the idea of what media should do. Media is a continuation of government. That's what it is. They don't understand anything else. The Deputy Minister for Communications, the Deputy Minister for Press, gives lectures to students of the journalism faculty at MGU saying, forget about searching for the truth. Journalism is not about searching for the truth. Journalism is about sort of doing propaganda, doing what your boss tells you to do. So, I mean, there are real journalists in Russia, and they're ridiculously brave. They take risks much bigger, but they're gold dust, and there's very few of them.
I'm going to give you a name, and I hope you'll tell our viewers who this person is. Anatoly Kashpirovsky. Who's that?
Oh, Kashpirovsky, that's hilarious. So Kashpirovsky, golly, this goes back a bit. So it's the late Soviet period. Russian TV has always been very boring. Soviet TV, ballet and a bit of ice hockey. Costume dramas. Suddenly, this odd-looking, very, kind of porn star-looking guy, very black hair and jet black eyes, appears on television, stares into the screen, and he's sort of a hypnotherapist / sort of like psychic guru, and started basically telling the whole of the Soviet nation that they should stay calm, that they, he would give them psychic powers through the power of television, that he could heal illnesses through television. And that he, if they were to put a glass of water in front of TV, that water, by the power of his mind, would be filled with positive energy. And it was a real shock to the system. I mean, he was kind of put on Soviet TV just as the Soviet Union was falling apart to kind of keep the nation calm. Everything was falling apart. And this was like a way to kind of keep the nation breathing deeply as the Soviet Union crumbled. A very early use of governments trying to use a cult leader to sort of, keep the nation pacified. And hugely popular in that period. Because, the Russians had never seen anything like it. I guess we have, the US has preachers, so it's a bit more familiar, but this is more like, C-SPAN showing a preacher. It's slightly different. But so he was a big thing. Then he went off there. And then he made a return after the 2008 financial crisis, when again I think there was a panic in TV that after the 2008 crisis people were panicking, and he made a comeback, not quite as badly as before. He wasn't trying to hypnotize people through TV. That would have been a little bit too crass. He had a show about sort of like psychic apparitions and ghosts.
Okay, well, that was then. Here's now.
Я оккупировал Украину. Вместе с украинцами я строил авиадвигатели, корабли, танки и автомобили. Меня попросили оттуда уйти. Теперь там разрушают все, что осталось от оккупанта. При этом там не строят ничего нового, кроме бесконечных майданов и диктатуры. Да, я оккупант, и я устал извиняться за это. Я оккупант по праву рождения. Я агрессор и кровожадный урод. Бойтесь. Поймите, мне не нужна ваша лицемерная свобода. Мне не нужна ваша гнилая демократия. Мне чуждо все, что вы называете западными ценностями. У меня другие интересы. Вежливо предупреждаю в последний раз. Не нарывайтесь.
Peter, what did we just see?
Well, that's a very good question. So it's a video that went viral, a 5-minute video, as you can see, done very slickly, with a really, in its own dark, brilliant way, sort of very humorous text about "I'm a Russian imperialist, fear me, I'm tired of apologizing, I don't need any of your Western values." Maybe what's not understandable to a Western viewer immediately is sort of the whole thing is laced with a very bitter irony, and it's quite funny. And it's basically saying, I'm a Russian imperialist, I'm a Russian occupier, I'm tired of apologizing for it. I used to be in, Estonia, and when I was there, it flourished. When I left, they now clean toilets for Europeans. I used to be in Ukraine, and it was flourishing. When I left, they just have endless revolutions. So that's what it is. It's very contemporary. It went viral. It was a sort of a 5-minute clip put on YouTube, went viral, retweeted by the Russian defense minister or senior Russian ministers. And then that's kind of where the story gets interesting, because several different groups claim responsibility. So this patriotic kid in Siberia somewhere, I think, said, I did it. And I did it because I'm a patriot. And I did it on my own. And people were like, oh, but hold on. This looks just like the style, the voiceover, the editing looks just like a series of videos that were produced several years ago by a very well-known studio called My Duck, which is My Duck Vision. And My Duck Vision said, we did it. And we were actually commissioned by the state to do it. And actually, it's ironic. And we're taking the mickey out of Russian propaganda. This is very typical for Russia, that you can never find who was behind something, whether it was ironic or not. But it still leaves an impression. Even if it's ironic, it still leaves a very sort of strong impression of, a very unique Russian brand of new patriotism.
That expression, taking the mickey out of something, is, I think, not one we use in Canada, but do you know how to say it in Russian?
Stibatsa, taking the, being very ironic about something.
Gotcha, okay.
Swear. But that was the funny thing about this thing. So let's say My Duck Vision, they have a series of these videos. They have another one about why does America want to start a war in Ukraine, which is a conspiracy on conspiracy on conspiracy about why America engineered the Ukrainian crisis in order to drag Russia into a war because Barack Obama is in a fight with someone else. It's an incredible, it's almost like it's almost a conscious satire on conspiracy as genre. And My Duck Vision do these incredibly humorous videos about how, again, being very ironic about conspiracies, about how Apple iPhones are actually pumped out of beneath the Gulf of Mexico by BP in a vast sort of Apple Masonic conspiracy to control the world. So you've got to understand, it's like a lot of the stuff in Russia, you can never tell when they're being serious or ironic. And that's maybe part of their kind of propaganda strategy. They want to keep you laughing uncomfortably and co-opt irony as much as possible.
Can you tell whether or not the state is funding this stuff?
This kid in Novosibirsk said no. He said he was responsible. My Duck said they're responsible and the state is funding it. Look, the state is usually funding everything in Russia at some level. If you go back to the 19th century, there was already a tradition of kind of, the state covertly funding what seemed like independent groups. So there's a very old tradition of the state being somewhere in virtually every seemingly independent organization. So we don't know. And the fact that we don't know is very much part of kind of the Russian tradition of Maskirovka, disguise, sort of using confusion, disorientation. It's a very unique tradition of propaganda, which we don't always appreciate. And we don't always quite understand it in the West.
No, I appreciate that, because my hunch is if some Western young person were watching that, they would laugh at its, over-the-top outrageousness, and they'd take it for what it was. Do you think the Russian population has the same understanding of what's going on when they watch these things?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you can be both ironic, you can both laugh at something and laugh with something and support something. The ironic tone is very, very common in Russia. I mean, this is a country which has gone through tumultuous change, that went through sort of like decades of communism where everyone fakes belief in it, which is all done incredibly ironically. So that ironic tone persists in Russia. I mean, it always has done. If you read Solzhenitsyn, the ironic way the KGB would do, very sarcastic way the KGB would do sort of like interrogations. That's kind of very much part of Russian culture. And that doesn't mean it's not serious. You can, what's that line, Richard III? I smile and murder while I smile. That doesn't mean it's deadly serious, but it's always done with a smirk and a smile. Look at Putin when he lies to, Western media or Merkel. He does this with his enjoyable smirk. You don't know. Is he, does he think we're going to believe there are no Russian soldiers in Ukraine, or is he actually laughing at us when he says it and smiling that very, very ambiguous smile that he does? So this is very much like the tone of Russia and its propaganda. It's very conceited.
Peter, as I thank you for coming on TVO tonight, we remind everybody you are the author most recently of Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, The Surreal Heart of the New Russia. You're a senior fellow with the Legatum Institute, and we thank you for being there on Skype from London, England.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.